that in the experimental method, a researcher attempts to establish causal relationship between two variables. What is a variable? Any stimulus or event which varies, that is, it takes on different values, or changes, and can be measured as a variable. An object by itself is not a variable, but its attributes are. For example, the pen that you use for writing is not a variable. But there are varieties of pens available in different shapes, sizes, and color. All of these are variables. The room in which you are sitting is not a variable, but its size is, as there are rooms of different sizes. The height of the individuals, 5 feet to 6 feet, is another variable. Similarly, people of different races have different colors. Young people have started dyeing their hair in different colors. Thus, color of hair becomes a variable. Intelligence is a variable. There are people with varying levels of intelligence, high, moderate, low. The presence or absence of persons in the room is a variable, as shown in the experiment in box 2.1. Thus, the variation can be in the quality or quantity of objects, events. Variables are of many types. We will, however, focus on independent and dependent variables. Independent variable is that variable which is manipulated or altered or its strength varied by the researcher in the experiment. It is the effect of this change in the variable which the researcher wants to observe or note in the study. In the experiment conducted by Latane and Darley, box 2.1, the researchers wanted to examine the effect of the presence of other persons on reporting of the smoke. The independent variable was presence or absence of other persons in the room. The variables on which the effect of independent variable is observed is called dependent variable. Dependent variable represents the phenomenon the researcher desires to explain. It is expected that change in the dependent variable will ensue from changes in the independent variable. The frequency of reporting of smoke in the above case was the dependent variable. Thus, the independent variable is the cause, and dependent variable the effect in any experimental situation. One must remember that independent and dependent variables are interdependent. Neither of them can be defined without the other. Also, independent variable chosen by the researcher is not the only variable that influences the dependent variable. Any behavioral event contains many variables. It also takes place within a context. Independent and dependent variables are chosen because of the researcher's theoretical interest. However, there are many other relevant or extraneous variables that influence the dependent variable, but the researcher may not be interested in examining their effects. These extraneous variables need to be controlled in an experiment so that a researcher is able to pinpoint the cause and effect relationship between independent and dependent variables. Experimental and control group. Experiments generally involve one or more experimental groups and one or more control groups. An experimental group is a group in which members of the group are exposed to independent variable manipulation. The control group is a comparison group that is treated in every way like the experimental group except that the manipulated variable is absent in it. For example, in the study by Latane and Darley, there were 2 experimental groups and 1 control group. As you may have noted, the participants in the study were sent to 3 types of rooms. In one room no one was present, control group. In the other 2 rooms, 2 persons were already seated, experimental groups. Of the 2 experimental groups, one group was instructed not to do anything when smoke filled in the room. The other group was not given any instructions. After the experimental manipulation had occurred, the performance of the control group measured in terms of reporting of smoke was compared with that of the experimental group. It was found that the control group participants reported in maximum numbers about the emergency, followed by the first experimental group members where the participants were not given any instructions, and the second experimental group consisting of Confederates reported the emergency situation the least. It should be noted that in an experiment, except for the experimental manipulation, other conditions are kept constant for both experimental and control groups. One attempts to control all those relevant variables which can influence the dependent variable. For example, the speed with which smoke started entering the rooms, the total amount of smoke in the rooms, physical and other conditions of the rooms were similar in case of all the 3 groups. The distribution of participants to experimental and control groups was done randomly, a method that ensures that each person has an equal chance of being included in any of the groups. If in one group the experimenter had included only males and in the other group females, the results obtained in the study could be due to the differences in gender rather than due to experimental manipulation. All relevant variables in experimental studies that might influence the dependent variable need to be controlled. These are of three major types: organismic variables, such as anxiety, intelligence, personality, etc., situational or environmental variables operating at the time of conducting the experiment, such as noise, temperature, humidity, and sequential variables. The sequence-related variables assume significance when the participants in experiments are required to be tested in several conditions. Exposure to many conditions may result in experimental fatigue, or practice effects, which may influence the results of the study and make the interpretation of the findings difficult. In order to control relevant variables, experimenters use several control techniques. Some illustrations are given below. Since the goal of an experiment is to minimize extraneous variables, the best way to handle this problem is to eliminate them from the experimental setting. For example, the experiment may be conducted in a soundproof and air-conditioned room to eliminate the effect of noise and temperature. Elimination is not always possible. In such cases, effort should be made to hold them constant so that their effect remains the same throughout the experiment. For controlling organismic, e.g., fear, motivation, and background variables, such as rural, urban, caste, socioeconomic status, matching is also used. In this procedure, the relevant variables in the two groups are equated or are held constant by taking matched pairs across conditions of the experiment. Counterbalancing technique is used to minimize the sequence effect. Suppose there are two tasks to be given in an experiment. Rather than giving the two tasks in the same sequence, the experimenter may interchange the order of the tasks. Thus, half of the group may receive the tasks in the order of A and B while the other half in order of B and A, or the same individual may be given the task in A, B, B, A order. Random assignment of participants to different groups eliminates any potential systematic differences between groups. The strength of a well-designed experiment is that it can provide, relatively speaking, a convincing evidence of a cause-effect relationship between two or more variables. However, experiments are often conducted in a highly controlled laboratory situation. In this sense, they only simulate situations that exist in the outside world. They are frequently criticized for this reason. The experiments may produce results that do not generalize well, or apply to real situations. In other words, they have low external validity. Another limitation of the laboratory experiment is that it is not always feasible to study a particular problem experimentally. For example, an experiment to study the effect of nutritional deficiency on intelligence level of children cannot be conducted as it would be ethically wrong to starve anyone. The third problem is that it is difficult to know and control all the relevant variables. Field experiments and quasi-experiments. If a researcher wants to have high generalizability or to conduct studies which are not possible in laboratory settings, she or he may go to the field or the natural setting where the particular phenomenon actually exists. In other words, she or he may conduct a field experiment. For example, a researcher may want to know which method would lead to better learning among students, lecture or demonstration method. For this, a researcher may prefer to conduct an experiment in the school. The researcher may select two groups of participants, teach one group by demonstration method and another group by the normal teaching method for some time. He may compare their performance at the end of the learning session. In such types of experiments, the control over relevant variables is less than what we find in laboratory experiments. Also, it is more time-consuming and expensive. Many variables cannot be manipulated in the laboratory settings. For example, if you want to study the effect of an earthquake on children who lost their parents, you cannot create this condition artificially in the laboratory. In such situations, the researcher adopts the method of quasi, the Latin word meaning, as if, experimentation. In such types of experiments, the independent variable is selected rather than varied or manipulated by the experimenter. For example, in the experimental group we can have children who lost their parents in the earthquake, and in the control group children who experienced the earthquake but did not lose their parents. Thus, a quasi-experiment attempts to manipulate an independent variable in a natural setting using naturally occurring groups to form experimental and control groups. Correlational research. In psychological research, we often wish to determine the relationship between two variables for prediction purposes. For example, you may be interested in knowing whether the amount of study time is related to the student's academic achievement. This question is different from the one which experimental method seeks to answer in the sense that here you do not manipulate the amount of study time and examine its impact on achievement. Rather, you simply find out the relationship between the two variables to determine whether they are associated, are covariant or not. The strength and direction of the relationship between the two variables is represented by a number, known as correlation coefficient. Its value can range from +1.0 through 0.0 to -1.0. As you can see, the coefficient of correlation is of three types: positive, negative, and zero. A positive correlation indicates that as the value of one variable, x, increases, the value of the other variable, y, will also increase. Similarly, when variable x decreases, a decrease in y2 takes place. Suppose it is found that more time the students spend on studying, the higher was their achievement score. Also, the less they studied, the lower was their achievement score. This type of association will be indicated by a positive number, and the stronger the association between studying and achievement, the closer the number would be to +1.0. You may find a correlation of +0.85, indicating a strong positive association between study time and achievement. On the other hand, a negative correlation tells us that as the value of one variable, x, increases, the value of the other, y, decreases. For example, you may hypothesize that as the hours of study time increase, the number of hours spent in other activities will decrease. Here, you are expecting a negative correlation, ranging between 0 and -1.0. It is also possible that sometimes no correlation may exist between the two variables. This is called zero correlation. Generally, it is difficult to find zero correlation, but the correlations found may be close to zero, e.g., -0.02 or +0.03. This indicates that no significant relationship exists between two variables or the two variables are unrelated. Survey research. You may have read in the newspapers or seen on the television that during elections surveys are conducted to find out if people would vote for a particular political party, or favor a particular candidate. Survey research came into existence to study opinions, attitudes, and social facts. Their main concern initially was to find out the existing reality or baseline. So they were used to find out facts such as the literacy rate at a particular time, religious affiliations, income level of a particular group of people, etc. They were also used to find out the attitude of people towards family planning, the attitude towards giving powers to the Panchayati Raj institutions for running programs related to health, education, sanitation, etc. However, they have now evolved into a sophisticated technique which helps in inferring various kinds of causal relationships. Box 2.2 provides an example of a study using the survey method. The survey research uses different techniques for collecting information. Included among these techniques are personal interviews, questionnaires, telephonic surveys, and controlled observations. These techniques are discussed here in some detail. Personal interviews. The interview method is one of the most frequently used methods for obtaining information from people. It is used in diverse kinds of situations. It is used by a doctor to obtain information from the patient, an employer when meeting a prospective employee, a salesperson interviewing a housewife to know why she uses a certain brand of soap. On television, we often see media persons interviewing people on issues of national and international importance. What happens in an interview? We see that two or more persons sit face to face with each Other, in which one person, generally called interviewer, asks the questions and the other person, called interviewee or respondent, answers the questions related to a problem. An interview is a purposeful activity conducted to derive factual information, opinions and attitudes, and reasons for particular behavior, etc. from the respondents. It is generally conducted face-to-face, but sometimes it can also take place over the phone. There can be two broad types of interviews, structured or standardized, and unstructured or non-standardized. This distinction is based upon the type of preparation we make before conducting the interview. As we have to ask questions during the interview, it is required that we prepare a list of questions beforehand. The list is called an interview schedule. A structured interview is one where the questions in the schedule are written clearly in a particular sequence. The interviewer has little or no liberty to make changes in the wordings of the questions or the order in which they are to be asked. The responses to these questions are also, in some cases, specified in advance. These are called close-ended questions. In contrast, in an unstructured interview, the interviewer has the flexibility to take decisions about the questions to be asked, the wording of the questions, and the sequence in which questions are to be asked. Since responses are not specified in such type of interviews, the respondent can answer the questions in the way she or he chooses to. Such questions are called open-ended questions. For example, if the researcher wants to know about the happiness level of a person, she or he may ask, "How happy are you?" The respondent may reply to this question the way she or he chooses to answer. An interview may have the following combinations of participants in an interview situation. Individual to individual, it is a situation where one interviewer interviews another person. Individual to group, in this situation, one interviewer interviews a group of persons. One variant of it is called a focus group discussion, FGD. Group to individuals, it is a situation where one group of interviewers interview one person. You may experience this type of situation when you appear for a job interview. Group to group, it is a situation where a own group of interviewers interview another group of interviewees. Interviewing is a skill which requires proper training. A good interviewer knows how to make the respondent at ease and get the optimal answer. She or he remains sensitive to the way a person responds and, if needed, probes for more information. If the respondent gives vague answers, the interviewer may try to get specific and concrete answers. The interview method helps in obtaining in-depth information. It is flexible and adaptable to individual situations, and can often be used when no other method is possible or adequate. It can be used even with children, and non-literate persons. An interviewer can know whether the respondent understands the questions, and can repeat or paraphrase questions. However, interviews require time. Often getting information from one person may take an hour or more, which may not be cost-effective. Questionnaire survey. The questionnaire is the most common, simple, versatile, and low-cost self-report method of collecting information. It consists of a predetermined set of questions. The respondent has to read the questions and mark the answers on paper rather than respond verbally to the interviewer. They are in some ways like highly structured interviews. Questionnaires can be distributed to a group of persons at a time who write down their answers to the questions and return to the researcher, or can be sent through mail. Generally, two types of questions are used in the questionnaire, open-ended and closed-ended. With open-ended questions, the respondent is free to write whatever answer she or he considers appropriate. In the closed-ended type, the questions and their probable answers are given and the respondent is required to select the correct answer. Examples of closed-ended questions require responses like yes, no, true, false, multiple choice, or using a rating scale. In case of rating scale, a statement is given and the respondent is asked to give his views on a 3-point, agree, undecided, disagree, or 5-point, strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, strongly disagree, or 7-point, 9-point, 11-point, or 13-point scale. In some cases, the participants are asked to rank a number of things in a preferential order. The questionnaire is used for collecting background and demographic information, information about past behavior, attitudes and opinions, knowledge about a particular topic, and expectations and aspirations of the persons. Sometimes a survey is conducted by sending the questionnaire by mail. The main problem of a mailed questionnaire is poor response from the respondents. Activity 2.3. An investigator wants to study people's attitude towards welfare programs by circulating a questionnaire via the Internet. Is this study likely to reflect the views of the general population accurately? Why or why not? Telephone survey. Surveys are also conducted through telephone, and nowadays you must have seen programs asking you to send your views through mobile phones SMS. The telephone survey helps in reducing time. However, since the respondents do not know the interviewer, the technique is fraught with uncooperativeness, reluctance, and superficial answers by the respondents. There is also a possibility that those responding may differ from those not responding, e.g., on age, gender, income levels, education levels, etc., besides their psychological characteristics. This will lead to very biased kinds of results. The method of observation have been discussed earlier. This method is also used for conducting surveys. Each method has its own advantages and limitations. The researcher needs to exercise caution in selecting a particular method. The survey method has several advantages. First, information can be gathered quickly and efficiently from thousands of persons. Second, since surveys can be conducted quickly, public opinions on new issues can be obtained almost as soon as the issues arise. There are some limitations of a survey too. First, people may give inaccurate information because of memory lapses, or they may not want to let the researcher know what they really believe about a particular issue. Second, people sometimes offer responses they think the researcher wants to hear. Psychological testing. Assessment of individual differences has remained one of the important concerns of psychology from the very beginning. Psychologists have constructed different types of tests for assessment of various human characteristics, such as intelligence, aptitude, personality, interest, attitudes, values, educational achievement, etc. These tests are used for various purposes, such as personnel selection, placement, training, guidance, diagnosis, etc., in multiple contexts including educational institutions, guidance clinics, industries, defense establishments, and so forth. Have you ever taken a psychological test? If you have, you might have seen that a test contains a number of questions, called items, with their probable responses, which are related to a particular human characteristic or attribute. It is important here that the characteristic for which a test has been developed should be defined clearly and unambiguously, and all items, questions, should be related to that characteristic only. You might also notice that often a test is meant for a particular age group. It may or may not have a fixed time limit for answering the questions. Technically speaking, a psychological test is a standardized and objective instrument, which is used to assess an individual's standing in relation to others on some mental or behavioral characteristics. Two things are worth noting in this definition: objectivity and standardization. Objectivity refers to the fact that if two or more researchers administer a psychological test on the same group of people, both of them would come up with more or less the same values for each person in the group. In order for a psychological test to become an objective measure, it is essential that items should be worded in such a manner that they communicate the same meaning to different readers. Also, the instructions to the test takers about how to answer the test items should be specified in advance. The procedure of administering the test, such as environmental conditions, time limit, mode of administration, individual or group, should be spelt, and the procedure for scoring of the participants' responses need to be described. The construction of a test is a systematic process and involves certain steps. It involves detailed analysis of items, and estimating reliability, validity, and norms of the whole test. Reliability of the test refers to the consistency of scores obtained by an individual on the same test on two different occasions. For example, you administer the test to a group of students today and re-administer it on the same set of students after some time, let us say 20 days. If the test is reliable, there should not be any variation in the scores obtained by the students on the two occasions. For this, we can compute test-retest reliability, which indicates the temporal stability, or stability of the test scores over time. It is computed by finding out coefficient of correlation between the two sets of scores on the same set of persons. Another kind of test reliability is called split-half reliability. It gives an indication about the degree of internal consistency of the test. This is based on the assumption that items of a test, if they are from the same domain, should correlate with each other. If they are from different domains, e.g., apples and oranges, then they would not. For finding out internal consistency, the test is divided into two equal halves employing odd-even method, items 1, 3, 5, in one group and items 2, 4, 6, in another group, and correlation is computed between the scores of odd and even items. For a test to be usable, it should also be valid. Validity refers to the question, does the test measure what it claims to measure? For example, if you have constructed a test of mathematics achievement, whether the test is measuring mathematical achievement or, for example, language proficiency. Finally, a test becomes a standardized test when norms are developed for the test. As mentioned earlier, norm is the normal or average performance of the group. The test is administered on a large number of students. Their average performance standards are set based on their age, sex, place of residence, etc. This helps us in comparing the performance of an individual student with others of the same group. It also helps in interpreting individuals' score obtained on a test. Types of test. Psychological tests are classified on the basis of their language, mode of administration, and difficulty level. Depending upon the language, we have verbal, nonverbal, and performance tests. Literacy is required for taking verbal tests as the items have to be written in some language. In nonverbal tests, items are made of symbols or pictures. Performance tests require movement of objects from their respective places in a particular order. Depending upon the mode of administration, psychological tests are divided into individual or group tests. An individual test is administered by the researcher to one person at a time, while group tests can be administered to large number of persons at the same time. In individual tests, the researcher administers the test face-to-face and remains seated before the test taker and notes down the responses. In the group test, the instructions about answering the items, etc., are written on the test, which the test taker reads and answers the questions accordingly. The test administrator explains the instructions to the entire group. Individual tests are time-consuming, but are important ways of getting responses from children, and from those who do not know the language. Group tests are easy to administer and are also less time-consuming. However, the responses are fraught with certain limitations. The respondent may not be motivated enough to answer the questions and may give fake responses. Psychological tests are also classified into speed and power tests. In a speed test, there is a time limit within which the test taker is required to answer all the items. Such a test evaluates the individual on the basis of time taken to answer the items accurately. In a speed test, all the items are of the same degree of difficulty. On the other hand, power test assesses the underlying ability, or power, of the individuals by allowing them sufficient time, i.e., these tests do not have any time limit. In a power test, the items are generally arranged in an increasing order of difficulty. If a person, for example, is unable to solve the sixth item, she or he will have difficulty in answering the subsequent items. It is, however, difficult to construct a pure speed or power test. Majority of the tests are a combination of both speed and power. While tests are often used in research and for making decisions about people, tests must be selected and used with great care. The test user or the decision maker should not rely on any single test. Test data should be combined with information about a person's background, interests, and past performance. Activity 2.4. Take a test with its manual and read it carefully, and identify the following: number and type of items. Information about reliability, validity, and norms. Type of test, verbal or otherwise, individual or group. Type of test, speed, power, or mixed. Any other characteristics? Discuss these with other students and the teacher. Case study. In this method, the emphasis is given on in-depth study of a particular case. Researchers focus on cases which can provide critical information or new learning on less understood phenomena. The case can be an individual with distinguishing characteristics, for example, a patient showing psychological disorders, or a small group of individuals having some commonality among them, for example, creative writers like Rabindranath Tagore and Mahadevi Verma, institutions, for example, poorly or successfully functioning school or a corporate office, and specific events, for example, children exposed to devastation by tsunami, war or vehicular pollution, etc. The cases that we select for study are unique and, therefore, are rich in information. A case study employs multiple methods for collecting information, such as interview, observation, and psychological tests from a variety of respondents who in some way or the other might be associated with the case and can provide useful information. With the help of case studies, psychologists have done research to understand feelings, fantasies, hopes, fears, traumatic experiences, parental upbringing and so on, that helps to understand a person's mind and behavior. Case studies provide a narrative or detailed descriptions of the events that take place in a person's life. A case study is a valuable research tool in the field of clinical psychology and human development. Freud's insights that led to the development of psychoanalytic theory emerged from his observations and showed that meticulous records must be maintained on individual cases. Similarly, Piaget developed his theory of cognitive development on the basis of observations of his 3 children. Case studies have been conducted to understand the pattern of socialization of children. For example, Minturn and Hitchcock conducted a case study of socialization of children among Rajputs of Kolhapur. Anandalakshmi studied aspects of childhood in a Wevas community in Varanasi. Case studies provide detailed in-depth depictions of people's lives. However, while generalizing on the basis of individual cases, one needs to be very cautious. The problem of validity in a single case study is quite challenging. It is recommended that the information should be collected using multiple strategies from different sources of information by a number of investigators. Careful planning of data collection is also very necessary. Throughout the process of data collection, the researcher is required to maintain a chain of evidence for linking various data sources having bearing on the research questions. As you have read, each method has its own limitations and advantages. Therefore, it is desirable that the researcher should not depend upon only one method. A combination of 2 or more methods should be used to get the real picture. If the methods converge, i.e. they give the same results, one can certainly be more confident. Activity 2.5. Identify the most appropriate method of enquiry for the following research problems. Does noise influence the problem-solving ability of the people? Should there be a dress code for college students? Studying the attitude of students, teachers, and parents towards homework. Studying the behavior of a student in a playgroup and in a classroom. Tracing the major life events of your favorite leader. Assessing the anxiety level of class 11 students of your school. Analysis of data. In the earlier section, we discussed different methods for collecting information. After data are collected, the next job of the researcher is to draw conclusions. This requires analysis of data. We generally use 2 methodological approaches for the analysis of data. These are quantitative and qualitative methods. In this section, we will briefly discuss these approaches. Quantitative method. As you may have gathered by now, psychological tests, questionnaires, structured interviews, etc. contain a series of close-ended questions. That is, the questions and their probable responses are given in these measures. Generally, these responses are given in scaled forms. That is, they indicate the strength and magnitude of the response. For example, they may vary from 1, low, to 5, 7 or 11, high. The participant's task is to select the most appropriate response. Sometimes there are right and wrong responses. A researcher assigns a number to each answer, normally 1 for right answers, and 0 for wrong answers. At the end, the researcher calculates the total of all these numbers and arrives at an aggregate score, which tells about the participant's level on that particular attribute, for example, intelligence, academic intelligence, etc. In doing so, the researcher converts the psychological attributes into a quantity, usually numbers. For the purpose of drawing conclusions, a researcher may compare individuals' score with that of the group, or compare the scores of two groups. This requires use of certain statistical methods about which you will study later. You have already read in mathematics in class 10 about the methods of central tendency, mean, median, and mode, methods of variability, range, quartile deviation, standard deviation, coefficients of correlation, and so forth. These and some other advanced statistical methods enable a researcher to make inferences and to give meaning to the data. Qualitative method. Human experiences are very complex. This complexity is lost when one elicits information from a respondent on the basis of a question. If you want to know how a mother feels about the loss of her child, you will need to hear her story to understand how her experience is organized and what meaning she has given to her suffering. Any attempt at its quantification will not enable you to get at the principles of organizing such experiences. Psychologists have developed various qualitative methods to analyze such data. One of them is narrative analysis. Also, data are not always available in the form of scores. When the researcher uses the method of participant observation or unstructured interview, the data are generally in a descriptive form, in participants' own words, field notes taken by the researchers, photographs, interview responses noted by the researcher are taped, video recorded, informal talks, etc. These type of data cannot be converted into scores or subjected to statistical analysis. Rather, the researcher uses the technique of content analysis to find out thematic categories and build those categories taking examples from the data. It is more descriptive in nature. It must be understood that quantitative and qualitative methods are not contradictory, rather, they are complementary to each other. In order to understand a phenomenon in its totality, a suitable combination of both methods is warranted. Limitations OFPSYCHOLOGICAL Enquiry. The advantages and limitations of each method have been discussed earlier. In this section, you will read some general problems faced by psychological measurement. Lack of true zero point. In physical sciences, measurements do start from zero. For example, if you want to measure the length of the table, you can measure it starting from zero and can say it is 3 feet long. Psychological measurements do not have a true zero point. For example, no person in this world has zero intelligence. All of us have some degree of intelligence. What psychologists do is that they arbitrarily decide a point is 0 point and proceed further. As a result, whatever scores we get in psychological studies are not absolute in nature, rather, they have relative value. In some of the studies, ranks are used as scores. For example, on the basis of marks obtained in some test, the teacher arranges the students in an order, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. The problem in such type of assessment is that the difference between first and second rank holders may not be the same as is the difference between the second and third rank holders. Out of 50, the first rank holder might score 48, the second 47, and the third 40. As you can see, the difference between the first and the second rank holders is not the same as is the case between second and third rank holders. This also illustrates the relative nature of the psychological measurement. Relative nature of psychological tools. Psychological tests are developed keeping in view the salient features of a particular context. For example, a test developed for urban students may contain items that demand familiarity with the stimuli available in the urban setting, multistoried buildings, airplanes, metro railway, etc. Such a test is not suitable for use with children living in tribal areas who would be more at ease with items that describe their flora and fauna. Similarly, a test developed in the Western countries may or may not be applicable in the Indian context. Such tests need to be properly modified and adapted keeping in view the characteristics of the context in which they are to be used. Subjective interpretation of qualitative data. Data from qualitative studies are largely subjective since they involve interpretation on the part of the researcher as well as the person providing data. The interpretations may vary from one individual to the other. It is, therefore, often suggested that in case of qualitative studies, the field work should be done by more than one investigator, who at the end of the day should discuss their observations and arrive at an agreement before finally giving it a meaning. In fact, one is better off, if the respondents too are involved in such meaning-making process. Ethical issues. As you know, psychological research is concerned with human behavior. The researcher is expected to follow certain ethics, or moral principles, while conducting the studies. These principles are respect for persons' privacy and choice to participate in the study, beneficence are protecting the participants in the study from any harm, and justice are sharing the benefits of research with all participants. Some of the important aspects of these ethical principles are described as follows. Voluntary participation. This principle states that the persons on whom you want to conduct the study should have the choice to decide whether to participate or not to participate in the study. The participants should have the freedom to decide about their participation without any coercion or excessive inducement, and the freedom to withdraw from the research without penalty, once it has begun. Informed consent. It is essential that the participants in a study should understand what will happen to them during the study. The principle of informed consent states that potential participants must receive this information before data from them are collected, so that they make an informed decision about participation in the study. In some of the psychological experiments, electric shock is given to the participants during the experiment. Still, in some cases obnoxious, e.g., harmful or unpleasant, stimuli are presented. They may at times be required to give some private information, which is generally not shared with others. In some studies, the technique of deception is used in which the participants are given instructions to think or imagine in certain ways and are given false information or feedback about their performance. For example, you are very intelligent, you are incompetent. It is, therefore, important that the participants are explained the nature of the study before its actual commencement. Debriefing. Once the study is over, the participants are provided with necessary information to complete their understanding of research. This is particularly important if deception has been used in the study. Debriefing ensures that participants leave the study in the same physical and mental state as when they entered. It should offer reassurance to the participants. The researcher should make efforts to remove any anxiety or other adverse effects that participants may have felt as a result of being deceived in the course of the study. Sharing the results of the study. In psychological research, after collecting information from the participants, we come back to our places of work, analyze the data and draw conclusions. It is obligatory for the researcher to go back to the participants and share the results of the study with them. When you go for data collection, the participants develop certain expectations from you. One of the expectations is that you will tell them about their behavior that you have investigated in the study. As a researcher, it is our moral duty to go back to the participants. This exercise has two advantages. 1. You fulfill the expectations of the participants. Second, the participants may tell you their opinion about the results, which sometimes may help you develop new insights. Confidentiality of data source. The participants in a study have the right to privacy. The researcher must safeguard their privacy by keeping the information provided by them in strict confidence. The information should only be used for research purposes and, in no circumstances, it should be passed on to other interested parties. The most effective way of protecting the confidentiality of participants is not to record their identities. This is, however, not possible in certain kinds of research. In such cases, code numbers are given on the data sheet, and the names with the codes are kept separately. The identification list should be destroyed as soon as the research is over. Key terms: case study, confidentiality, control group, correlational research, data, debriefing, dependent variable, experimental group, experimental method, group test, hypothesis, independent variable, individual test, interview, negative correlation, norms, objectivity, observation, performance tests, positive correlation, power test, psychological test, qualitative method, quantitative method, questionnaire, reliability, speed test, structured interview, survey, unstructured interview, validity, variable. Summary. A psychological research is conducted for the purpose of description, prediction, explanation, control of behavior, and application of knowledge generated in an objective manner. It involves the following 4 steps: conceptualizing a problem, collection of data, analyzing data, drawing and revising research conclusions. The psychological research is also conducted to discover and understand the subjective meanings of events as they occur in a particular context, and also reflect upon one's own behavior and experiences. In psychological studies, different types of data including demographic, environmental, physical, physiological, and psychological information are collected. However, the data in psychological studies remain located in a context and are tied to the theory and method used for its collection. Different methods are used for collecting information. The observation method is used for describing the behavior. It is characterized by selection of a particular behavior, its recording and analysis. Observation can be done in a naturalistic or controlled laboratory conditions. It can take the form of a participant or non-participant observation. The experimental method helps in establishing cause-effect relationship. The effect of the presence of independent variable on the dependent variable is studied using experimental and control groups. The purpose of correlational research is investigating association between variables as well as making predictions. The relationship between 2 variables can be positive, 0 or negative, and strength of association varies from +1.0 through 0.0 to -1.0. The focus of survey research is to inform about the existing reality. Surveys can be conducted by using structured and unstructured interviews, mailed questionnaires, and telephone. The psychological tests are standardized and objective instruments which help in knowing one's standing in comparison to others. Tests can be verbal, nonverbal, and performance types, which can be administered individually or to the entire group at a time. The method of case study gives detailed in-depth information about a particular case. The data collected through the use of these methods are analyzed through quantitative and qualitative methods. The quantitative methods allow the use of statistical procedure for drawing conclusions. Narrative method and method of content analysis are some methods that are used in case of qualitative research. Lack of absolute zero-point, relative nature of psychological tools, and subjective interpretation of qualitative data are some of the limitations of psychological inquiry. Ethical principles of voluntary participation of the subjects, their informed consent, and sharing of results with the participants must be followed by a researcher. Box 2.1 Example of an experiment. 2 American psychologists, Bibladen and John Darley, conducted a study in 1970. In order to participate in this study, the students of Columbia University arrived individually at a laboratory. They were given the impression that they would be interviewed on a certain topic. Each student was sent to a waiting room to complete a preliminary questionnaire. Some of them found 2 other people already seated in the room, while others sat down alone. Soon after the students had started working on the questionnaire, smoke began filling the room through a wall vent. The smoke could hardly be ignored. Within 4 minutes the room contained enough smoke to interfere with vision and breathing. Latane and Darley were primarily interested in knowing how frequently students simply got up and left the room to report the emergency. Most, 75%, of the students who were waiting alone reported the smoke, but those reporting in groups were far less. Groups consisting of 3 naive students reported it only 38% of the time. When the students waited with 2 other Confederates, who were instructed beforehand by the researchers to do nothing, only 10% students reported smoke. Box 2.2 Example of survey method. In December 2004, a survey was conducted by Outlook Saptahik magazine, the 10th of January 2005 to know what makes the people of India happy. The survey was conducted in 8 big cities, namely Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Jaipur, and Ranchi. 817 persons in the age group of 25 to 55 years participated in the study. The questionnaire used in the survey contained different types of questions. The first question, "Are you happy?" required respondents to give their views on a 5-point scale. 5 equals extremely happy, 4 equals more or less happy, 3 equals neither happy nor unhappy, 2 equals more or less unhappy, 1 equals extremely unhappy. About 47% people reported that they were extremely happy, 28% were more or less happy, 11% said they were neither happy nor unhappy, and 7% each fell in the last 2 categories, more or less unhappy, and extremely unhappy. The second question, "Can you buy happiness with money?" had 3 alternatives: yes, no, don't know. About 80% people expressed that money can't buy happiness. Another question tried to know, what gives them maximum happiness? More than 50% respondents reported that peace of mind, 52%, and health, 50%, gave them maximum happiness. This was followed by responses such as success in work, 43%, and family, 40%. Another question asked was to know, what do they do when they feel unhappy or sad? It was reported that 36% people opted for listening to music, 23% found respite in the company of friends, and 15% went for a movie. Activity 2.2. Identify the independent and dependent variables from the given hypotheses. Teachers' classroom behavior affects students' performance. Healthy parent-child relationship facilitates emotional adjustment of children. Increase in the level of peer pressure increases the level of anxiety. Enriching the environment of young children with special books and puzzles enhances their performance. Review questions. What are the goals of scientific inquiry? Describe the various steps involved in conducting a scientific inquiry. Explain the nature of psychological data. How do experimental and control groups differ? Explain with the help of an example. A researcher is studying the relationship between speed of cycling and the presence of people. Formulate a relevant hypothesis and identify the independent and dependent variables. Discuss the strengths and weaknesses of experimental method as a method of inquiry. Dr. Krishnan is going to observe and record children's play behavior at a nursery school without attempting to influence or control the behavior. Which method of research is involved? Explain the process and discuss its merits and demerits. Give 2 examples of the situations where survey method can be used. What are the limitations of this method? Differentiate between an interview and a questionnaire. Explain the characteristics of a standardized test. Describe the limitations of psychological inquiry. What are the ethical guidelines that a psychologist needs to follow while conducting a psychological inquiry? Project ideas. Conduct a survey of the after-school activities of Class 5 and Class 9 students, taking a sample of 10 students in each. Find information about the time devoted by them in various activities, such as studying, playing, television viewing, hobbies, etc. Do you find any difference? What conclusions do you draw and what suggestions would you offer? Conduct a study in your group to see the effect of recitation on learning of poetry. Take 10 6-year-olds and divide them into 2 groups. Give Group 1 a new poem to learn and instruct them to read it loudly for 15 minutes. Take Group 2 and give them the same new poem to learn but instruct them not to read it loudly. After 15 minutes, ask the 2 groups to recall. Care needs to be taken to see that both the groups are dealt with separately. After the recall has taken place, note down the observation. Identify what method of research you used, the hypothesis, the variables, and the kind of experimental design that were there. Compare notes with the other groups and share the result with your teacher in the class. Chapter 3. The Basis of Human Behavior. After reading this chapter, you would be able to understand the evolutionary nature of human behavior. Relate the functions of nervous system and endocrine system to behavior. Explain the role of genetic factors in determining behavior. Understand the role of culture in shaping human behavior. Describe the processes of enculturation, socialization, and acculturation, and relate biological and socio-cultural factors in understanding human behavior. Contents. Introduction. Evolutionary perspective. Biological and cultural roots. Biological basis of behavior. Neurons. Structure and functions of nervous system and endocrine system and their relationship with behavior and experience. The nervous system. The endocrine system. Heredity, genes and behavior. Cultural basis, socio-cultural shaping of behavior. Concept of culture. Biological and cultural transmission, Box 3.1. Enculturation. Socialization. Acculturation. Key terms. Summary. Review questions. Project ideas. There are 193 species of monkeys and apes. 192 of them are covered with hair. The exception is the naked ape self-named Homo sapiens. Desmond Morris. Introduction. Human beings, the Homo sapiens, are the most developed organisms among all creatures on this earth. Their ability to walk upright, larger brain size relative to body weight, and the proportion of specialized brain tissues make them distinct from other species. These features have evolved through millions of years and have enabled them to engage in several complex behaviors. Scientists have attempted to study the relationship of complex human behavior with the processes of the nervous system, particularly the brain. They have tried to discover the neural basis of thoughts, feelings, and actions. By understanding the biological aspects of human beings, you will be able to appreciate how the brain, environment and behavior interact to generate unique forms of behavior. In this chapter, we begin with a general description of the nervous system in an evolutionary perspective. You will also study the structure and functions of the nervous system. You will learn about the endocrine system, and its influence on human behavior. Later in this chapter, you will also study the notion of culture and show its relevance to the understanding of behavior. This will be followed by an analysis of the processes of enculturation, socialization, and acculturation. Evolutionary perspective. You must have observed that people differ with respect to their physical and psychological characteristics. The uniqueness of individuals results from the interaction of their genetic endowments and environmental demands. In this world, there are millions of different species of organisms differing in a variety of ways. Biologists believe that these species were not always like this, they have evolved to their present form from their pre-existing forms. It is estimated that the characteristics of modern human beings developed some 2,000 years ago as a result of their continuous interaction with the environment. Evolution refers to gradual and orderly biological changes that result in a species from their pre-existing forms in response to the changing adaptational demands of their environment. Physiological as well as behavioral changes that occur due to the evolutionary process are so slow that they become visible after hundreds of generations. Evolution occurs through the process of natural selection. You know that members of each species vary greatly in their physical structure and behavior. The traits or characteristics that are associated with high rate of survival and reproduction of those species are the most likely ones to be passed on to the next generations. When repeated generation after generation, natural selection leads to the evolution of new species that are more effectively adapted to their particular environment. This is very similar to the selective breeding of horses or other animals these days. Breeders select the fittest and the fastest male and female horses from their stock, and promote them for selective breeding so that they can get the fittest horses. Fitness is the ability of an organism to survive and contribute its genes to the next generation. 3 important features of modern human beings differentiate them from their ancestors. 1. A bigger and developed brain with increased capacity for cognitive behaviors like perception, memory, reasoning, problem solving, and use of language for communication. 2. Ability to walk upright on 2 legs, and 3. A free hand with a workable opposing thumb. These features have been with us for several thousand years. Our behaviors are highly complex and more developed than those of other species because we have got a large and highly developed brain. Human brain development is evidenced by 2 facts. Firstly, the weight of the brain is about 2.35% of the total body weight, and it is the highest among all species. In elephant it is 0.2%. Secondly, the human cerebrum is more evolved than other parts of the brain. These evolutions have resulted due to the influence of environmental demands. Some behaviors play an obvious role in evolution. For example, the ability to find food, avoid predators, and defend one's young are the objectives related to the survival of the organisms as well as their species. The biological and behavioral qualities, which are helpful in meeting these objectives, increase an organism's ability to pass it on to the future generation through its genes. The environmental demands lead to biological and behavioral changes over a long period of time. Biological and cultural roots. An important determinant of our behavior is the biological structures that we have inherited from our ancestors in the form of developed body and brain. The importance of such a biological basis becomes obvious when we observe cases in which brain cells have been destroyed by any disease, use of drug or an accident. Such cases develop various kinds of physical and behavioral disabilities. Many children develop mental retardation and other abnormal symptoms due to transmission of a faulty gene from the parents. As human beings, we not only share a biological system, but also certain cultural systems. These systems are quite varied across human populations. All of us negotiate our lives with the culture in which we are born and brought up. Culture provides us with different experiences and opportunities of learning by putting us in a variety of situations, or placing different demands on our lives. Such experiences, opportunities and demands also influence our behavior considerably. These influences become more potent and visible as we move from infancy to later years of life. Thus, besides biological bases, there are cultural bases of behavior also. You will learn about the role of culture in behavior at a later point in this chapter. Biological basis of behavior. Neurons. Neuron is the basic unit of our nervous system. Neurons are specialized cells, which possess the unique property of converting various forms of stimuli into electrical impulses. They are also specialized for reception, conduction and transmission of information in the form of electrochemical signals. They receive information from sense organs or from other adjacent neurons, carry them to the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, and bring motor information from the central nervous system to the motor organs, muscles and glands. Nearly 12 billion neurons are found in the human nervous system. They are of many types and vary considerably in shape, size, chemical composition, and function. Despite these differences, they share three fundamental components, i.e., soma, dendrites, and axon. The soma or cell body is the main body of the nerve cell. It contains the nucleus of the cell as well as other structures common to living cells of all types, figure 3.1. The genetic material of the neuron is stored inside the nucleus and it becomes actively engaged during cell reproduction and protein synthesis. The soma also contains most of the cytoplasm, cell fluid, of the neuron. Dendrites are the branch-like specialized structures emanating from the soma. They are the receiving ends of a neuron. Their function is to receive the incoming neural impulses from adjacent neurons or directly from the sense organs. On dendrites are found specialized receptors, which become active when a signal arrives in electrochemical or biochemical form. The received signals are passed on to soma and then to axon so that the information is relayed to another neuron or to muscles. The axon conducts the information along its length, which can be several feet in the spinal cord and less than a millimeter in the brain. At the terminal point, the axon branches into small structures, called terminal buttons. These buttons have the capability for transmitting information to another neuron, gland and muscle. Neurons generally conduct information in one direction, that is, from the dendrites through soma and axon to the terminal buttons. The conduction of information from one place to another in the nervous system is done through nerves, which are bundles of axons. Nerves are mainly of two types, sensory and motor. Sensory nerves, also called afferent nerves, carry information from sense organs to central nervous system. On the other hand, motor nerves, also called efferent nerves, carry information from central nervous system to muscles or glands. A motor nerve conducts neural commands which direct, control, and regulates our movements and other responses. There are some mixed nerves also, but sensory and motor fibers in these nerves are separate. Nerve impulse. Information travels within the nervous system in the form of a nerve impulse. When stimulus energy comes into contact with receptors, electrical changes in the nerve potential start. Nerve potential is a sudden change in the electrical potential of the surface of a neuron. When the stimulus energy is relatively weak, the electrical changes are so small that the nerve impulse is not generated, and we do not feel that stimulus. If the stimulus energy is relatively strong, electrical impulses are generated and conducted towards the central nervous system. The strength of the nerve impulse, however, does not depend on the strength of the stimulus that started the impulse. The nerve fibers work according to the all or none principle, which means that they either respond completely or do not respond at all. The strength of the nerve impulse remains constant along the nerve fiber. Synapse. Information is transmitted from one place to another within the nervous system in the form of a neural impulse. A single neuron can carry a neural impulse up to a distance covered by the length of its axon. When the impulse is to be conducted to a distant part of the body, a number of neurons participate in the process. In this process, one neuron faithfully relays the information to a neighboring neuron. The axon tip of a preceding neuron make functional connections or synapse with dendrites of the other neuron. A neuron is never physically connected with another neuron, rather there is a small gap between the two. This gap is known as synaptic cleft. The neural impulse from one neuron is transmitted by a complex synaptic transmission process to another neuron. The conduction of neural impulse in the axon is electrochemical, while the nature of synaptic transmission is chemical, figure 3.2. The chemical substances are known as neurotransmitters. Structure and functions of nervous system and endocrine system and their relationship with behavior and experience. Since our biological structures play an important role in organization and execution of behavior, we shall look at these structures in some detail. In particular, you will read about the nervous system and the endocrine system, which work together in giving a shape to human behavior and experience. The nervous system. Human nervous system is the most complex and most developed of all living creatures. Though the nervous system functions as a whole, for the ease of study, we can divide it into many parts depending on its location or functions. Based on location, the nervous system can be divided into two parts: central nervous system (CNS) and peripheral nervous system (PNS). The part of the nervous system found inside the hard bony cases, cranium and backbone, is classified as CNS. Brain and spinal cord are the organs of this system. The parts of the nervous system other than central nervous system are placed in the PNS. PNS can be further classified into somatic and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system is concerned with voluntary actions, while the autonomic nervous system performs functions on which we have no voluntary control. The organization of the nervous system is schematically presented in figure 3.3. The peripheral nervous system. The PNS is composed of all the neurons and nerve fibers that connect the CNS to the rest of the body. The PNS is divided into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. The PNS provides information to the CNS from sensory receptors, eyes, ears, skin, etc., and relays back motor commands from the brain to the muscles and glands. The somatic nervous system. This system consists of two types of nerves, called cranial nerves and spinal nerves. There are 12 sets of cranial nerves which either emanate from or reach different locations of the brain. There are three types of cranial nerves: sensory, motor, and mixed. Sensory nerves collect sensory information from receptors of the head region, vision, audition, smell, taste, touch, etc., and carry them to the brain. The motor nerves carry motor impulses originating from the brain to muscles of the head region. For example, movements of the eyeballs are controlled by motor cranial nerves. Mixed nerves have both sensory and motor fibers, which conduct sensory and motor information to and from the brain. There are 31 sets of spinal nerves coming out of or reaching to the spinal cord. Each set has sensory and motor nerves. Spinal nerves have two functions. The sensory fibers of the spinal nerves collect sensory information from all over the body, except the head region, and send them to the spinal cord, from where they are then carried out to the brain. In addition, motor impulses coming down from the brain are sent to the muscles by the motor fibers of the spinal nerves. The autonomic nervous system. This system governs activities which are normally not under direct control of individuals. It controls such internal functions as breathing, blood circulation, salivation, stomach contraction, and emotional reactions. Figure 3.4. These activities of the autonomic system are under the control of different structures of the brain. The autonomic nervous system has two divisions, sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. Although the effect of one division is opposite to the effect of the other, both work together to maintain a state of equilibrium. The sympathetic division deals with emergencies when the action must be quick and powerful, such as in situations of fight or flight. During this period, the digestion stops, blood flows from internal organs to the muscles, and breathing rate, oxygen supply, heart rate, and blood sugar level increases. The parasympathetic division is mainly concerned with conservation of energy. It monitors the routine functions of the internal system of the body. When the emergency is over, the parasympathetic division takes over. It decelerates the sympathetic activation and calms down the individual to a normal condition. As a result, all body functions like heartbeat, breathing, and blood flow return to their normal levels. The central nervous system. The central nervous system, CNS, is the center of all neural activity. It integrates all incoming sensory information, performs all kinds of cognitive activities, and issues motor commands to muscles and glands. The CNS comprises of the A brain and B spinal cord. You will now read about the functions of the major parts of the brain and for what behaviors is each part responsible. The brain and behavior. It is believed that the human brain has evolved over millions of years from the brains of lower animals, and this evolutionary process still continues. We can examine the levels of structures in the brain, from its earliest to the most recent form in the process of evolution. The limbic system, brain stem and cerebellum are the oldest structures, while cerebral cortex is the latest development in the course of evolution. An adult brain weighs about 1.36 kilograms and contains around 100 billion neurons. However, the most amazing thing about the brain is not its number of neurons but its ability to guide human behavior and thought. The brain is organized into structures and regions that perform specific functions. Brain scanning reveals that while some mental functions are distributed among different areas of the brain, many activities are localized also. For example, the occipital lobe of the brain is a specialized area for vision. Activity 3.1. Ask some students to make small slips of paper and write names of the parts of the nervous system on them. Put the slips together in a bowl and ask the students from the class to pick one slip each. Give them a few minutes and ask them to learn the location and function of the part mentioned in the slip. Each student is to then come forward and introduce him, herself as that part and explain the location and functions of that part. Structure of the brain. For the convenience of study, the brain can be divided into three parts: hindbrain, midbrain and forebrain. Figure 3.5. Hindbrain. This part of the brain consists of the following structures. Medulla oblongata. It is the lowest part of the brain that exists in continuation of the spinal cord. It contains neural centers, which regulate basic life-supporting activities like breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. This is why medulla is known as the vital center of the brain. It has some centers of autonomic activities also. Pons. It is connected with medulla on one side and with the midbrain on the other. A nucleus, neural center, of pons receives auditory signals relayed by our ears. It is believed that pons is involved in sleep mechanism, particularly the sleep characterized by dreaming. It contains nuclei affecting respiratory movement and facial expressions also. Cerebellum. This highly developed part of the hindbrain can be easily recognized by its wrinkled surface. It maintains and controls posture and equilibrium of the body. Its main function is coordination of muscular movements. Though the motor commands originate in the forebrain, the cerebellum receives and coordinates them to relay to the muscles. It also stores the memory of movement patterns so that we do not have to concentrate on how to walk, dance, or ride a bicycle. Midbrain. The midbrain is relatively small in size and it connects the hindbrain with the forebrain. A few neural centers related to some special reflexes and visual and auditory sensations are found here. An important part of midbrain, known as Reticular Activating System (RAS), is responsible for our arousal. It makes us alert and active by regulating sensory inputs. It also helps us in selecting information from the environment. Forebrain. It is considered to be the most important part of the brain because it performs all cognitive, emotional, and motor activities. We will discuss four major parts of the forebrain: hypothalamus, thalamus, limbic system, and cerebrum. Hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is one of the smallest structures in the brain, but plays a vital role in our behavior. It regulates physiological processes involved in emotional and motivational behavior, such as eating, drinking, sleeping, temperature regulation, and sexual arousal. It also regulates and controls the internal environment of the body, e.g., heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and regulates the secretion of hormones from various endocrine glands. Thalamus. It consists of an egg-shaped cluster of neurons situated on the ventral, upper, side of the hypothalamus. It is like a relay station that receives all incoming sensory signals from sense organs and sends them to appropriate parts of the cortex for processing. It also receives all outgoing motor signals coming from the cortex and sends them to appropriate parts of the body. The limbic system. This system is composed of a group of structures that form part of the old mammalian brain. It helps in maintaining internal homeostasis by regulating body temperature, blood pressure, and blood sugar level. It has close links with the hypothalamus. Besides hypothalamus, the limbic system comprises the hippocampus and amygdala. The hippocampus plays an important role in long-term memory. The amygdala plays an important role in emotional behavior. The cerebrum, also known as cerebral cortex, this part regulates all higher levels of cognitive functions, such as attention, perception, learning, memory, language behavior, reasoning, and problem solving. The cerebrum makes 2/3 of the total mass of the human brain. Its thickness varies from 1.5 mm to 4 mm, which covers the entire surface of the brain and contains neurons, neural nets, and bundles of axons. All these make it possible for us to perform organized actions and create images, symbols, associations, and memories. The cerebrum is divided into two symmetrical halves, called the cerebral hemispheres. Although the two hemispheres appear identical, functionally one hemisphere usually dominates the other. For example, the left hemisphere usually controls language, behavior. The right hemisphere is usually specialized to deal with images, spatial relationships, and pattern recognition. These two hemispheres are connected by a white bundle of myelinated fibers, called corpus callosum, that carries messages back and forth between the hemispheres. Cerebral cortex has also been divided into 4 lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. The frontal lobe is mainly concerned with cognitive functions, such as attention, thinking, memory, learning, and reasoning, but it also exerts inhibitory effects on autonomic and emotional responses. The parietal lobe is mainly concerned with cutaneous sensations and their coordination with visual and auditory sensations. The temporal lobe is primarily concerned with the processing of auditory information. Memory for symbolic sounds and words resides here. Understanding of speech and written language depends on this lobe. The occipital lobe is mainly concerned with visual information. It is believed that interpretation of visual impulses, memory for visual stimuli, and color visual orientation is performed by this lobe. Physiologists and psychologists have tried to identify specific functions associated with specific brain structures. They have found that no activity of the brain is performed only by a single part of the cortex. Normally, other parts are involved, but it is also correct that there is some localization of functions, i.e., for a particular function, a particular part of the cortex plays a more important role than the other parts. For example, if you are driving a car, you see the road and other vehicles by the function of your occipital lobe, hear the horns by the function of your temporal lobe, do many motor activities controlled by parietal lobe, and make decisions by the help of frontal lobe. The whole brain acts as a well-coordinated unit in which different parts contribute their functions separately. Spinal cord. The spinal cord is a long rope-like collection of nerve fibers, which run along the full length. Inside the spine, its one end is connected with the medulla of the brain and another is free at the tail end. Its structure all along its length is similar. The butterfly-shaped mass of gray matter present in the center of the spinal cord contains association neurons and other cells. Surrounding the gray matter is the white matter of the spinal cord, which is composed of the ascending and descending neural tracts. These tracts, collections of nerve fibers, connect the brain with the rest of the body. The spinal cord plays the role of a huge cable, which exchanges innumerable messages with the CNS. There are two main functions of the spinal cord. Firstly, it carries sensory impulses coming from the lower parts of the body to the brain, and motor impulses originating from the brain to all over the body. Secondly, it performs some simple reflexes that do not involve the brain. Simple reflexes involve a sensory nerve, a motor nerve, and the association neurons of the gray matter of the spinal cord. Reflex action. A reflex is an involuntary action that occurs very quickly after its specific kind of stimulation. The reflex action takes place automatically without conscious decision of the brain. Reflex actions are inherited in our nervous system through evolutionary processes, for example, the eye blinking reflex. Whenever any object suddenly comes near our eyes, our eyelids blink. Reflexes serve to protect the organism from potential threats and preserve life. Though several reflex actions are performed by our nervous system, the familiar reflexes are the knee-jerk, pupil constriction, pulling away from very hot or cold objects, breathing and stretching. Most reflex actions are carried out by the spinal cord and do not involve the brain. The endocrine system. The endocrine glands play a crucial role in our development and behavior. They secrete specific chemical substances, called hormones, which control some of our behaviors. These glands are called ductless glands or endocrine glands, because they do not have any duct, unlike other glands, to send their secretions to specific places. Hormones are circulated by the bloodstream. The endocrine glands form the endocrine system of the body. This system works in conjunction with different parts of the nervous system. The whole system is thus known as neuroendocrine system. Figure 3.6 shows the major endocrine glands of the body. Pituitary gland. This gland is situated within the cranium just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland is divided into anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is directly connected with hypothalamus, which regulates its hormonal secretions. The pituitary gland secretes the growth hormone and many other hormones, which direct and regulate the secretions of many other endocrine glands found in our body. This is why the pituitary gland is known as the master gland. Some hormones are secreted at a steady rate throughout life, while others are secreted at an appropriate time in life. For example, the growth hormone is released steadily through childhood, with some spurt during adolescence, but gonadotropic hormones are secreted at the age of puberty, which stimulates the secretion of appropriate sex hormones among boys and girls. As a result, primary and secondary sexual changes take place. Thyroid gland. This gland is located in the neck. It produces thyroxine that influences the body's metabolic rate. Optimum amount of thyroxine is secreted and regulated by an anterior pituitary hormone, the thyroid-stimulating hormone. TSH. The steady secretion of this hormone maintains the production of energy, consumption of oxygen and elimination of wastes in body cells. On the other hand, underproduction of thyroxine leads to physical and psychological lethargy. If thyroid gland is removed in young animals, their growth is stunted and they fail to develop sexually. Adrenal gland. This gland is located above each kidney. It has two parts, adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla, each secreting different hormones. The secretion of adrenal cortex is controlled and regulated by adrenocorticotrophic hormone, ACTH, secreted by anterior pituitary gland. When the secretion of adrenal cortex goes down, anterior pituitary gets the message and increases the secretion of ACTH, which stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete more hormones. The adrenal cortex secretes a group of hormones, called corticoids, which are utilized by the body for a number of physiological purposes, e.g., regulation of minerals in the body, particularly sodium, potassium, and chlorides. Any disturbance in its function seriously affects the functions of the nervous system. Adrenal medulla secretes two hormones, namely epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline, respectively. Sympathetic activation, such as increased heart rate, oxygen consumption, metabolic rate, muscle tone, etc., take place through the secretion of these two hormones. Epinephrine and norepinephrine stimulate the hypothalamus, which prolongs emotions in an individual even when the stressor has been removed. Pancreas. The pancreas, lying near the stomach, has a primary role in digestion of food, but it also secretes a hormone known as insulin. Insulin helps the liver to break down glucose for use by the body or for storage as glycogen by the liver. When insulin is not secreted in proper amount, people develop a disease called diabetic mellitus or simply diabetes. Gonad. Gonads refer to testes in males and ovaries in females. The hormones secreted by these glands control and regulate sexual behaviors and reproductive functions of males and females. Secretion of hormones of these glands is initiated, maintained and regulated by a hormone, called gonadotrophic hormone, GTH, secreted by the anterior pituitary. The secretion of GTH starts at the age of puberty, 10 to 14 years in human beings, and stimulates gonads to secrete hormones, which in turn stimulates development of primary and secondary sexual characteristics. The ovaries in females produce estrogens and progesterone. Estrogens guide the sexual development of the female body. Primary sexual characteristics related with reproduction, such as development of ovum or egg cell, appear on every 28 days or so in the ovary of a sexually mature female. Secondary sexual characteristics, such as breast development, rounded body contours, widened pelvis, etc., also depend on this hormone. Progesterone has no role in sexual development. Its function is related with preparation of uterus for the possible reception of fertilized ovum. The hormonal system for reproductive behavior is much simpler in the male because there is no cyclic pattern. Testes in males produce sperm continuously and secrete male sex hormones called androgens. The major androgen is testosterone. Testosterone prompts secondary sexual changes such as physical changes, growth of facial and body hairs, deepening of voice, and increase in sexually oriented behavior. Increased aggression and other behaviors are also linked with testosterone production. The normal functioning of all hormones is crucial to our behavioral well-being. Without a balanced secretion of hormones, the body would be unable to maintain the state of internal equilibrium. Without the increased secretion of hormones during the times of stress, we would not be able to react effectively to potential dangers in our environment. Finally, without the secretion of hormones at specific times in our lives, we would not be able to grow, mature and reproduce. Heredity, genes and behavior. We inherit characteristics from our parents in the form of genes. A child at birth possesses a unique combination of genes received from both parents. This inheritance provides a distinct biological blueprint and timetable for an individual's development. The study of the inheritance of physical and psychological characteristics from ancestors is referred to as genetics. The child begins life as a single zygote cell, mother's ovum fertilized by father's sperm. Zygote is a tiny cell with a nucleus in its center containing chromosomes. These chromosomes with all genes are inherited from each parent in equal numbers. Chromosomes. Chromosomes are the hereditary elements of the body. They are thread-like paired structures in the nucleus of each cell. The number of chromosomes per nucleus is distinctive, and is constant for each living organism. The gametic cells, sperm and ovum, have 23 chromosomes but not in pairs. A new generation results from the fusion of a sperm cell and an egg cell. At the time of conception, the organism inherits 46 chromosomes from parents, 23 from the mother and 23 from the father. Each of these chromosomes contains thousands of genes. However, the sperm cell, fathers, differs from the egg cell, mothers, in one important respect. The 23rd chromosome of the sperm cell can be either the capital X or Y type of the English alphabet. If the X-type sperm fertilizes the egg cell, the fertilized egg will have an XX 23rd chromosome pair, and the child will be a female. On the other hand, if a Y-type sperm fertilizes the egg, the 23rd chromosome pair will be XY, and the child will be a male. Chromosomes are composed mainly of a substance called deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Our genes are composed chiefly of DNA molecules. The two genes that control the development of each trait are situated at the same locus, one on each chromosome of a particular pair. The exception is the sex chromosomes, i.e., the pair of chromosomes that determines an individual's sex. Activity 3.2. Divide the class in two groups and have a debate on the topic. Psychologists should leave the study of neurons, synapses and the nervous system to biologists. One group should speak in favor and the other group against the motion. Genes. Every chromosome stores thousands of genetic commands in the form of genes. These genes dictate much of the course of an organism's development. They contain instructions for the production of specific proteins, which regulate the body's physiological processes and the expression of phenotypic traits. The observable traits of an organism are called phenotype, e.g., body build, physical strength, intelligence, and other behavioral traits. The traits, which can be passed on to the offspring through genetic material, are called its genotype. All biological and psychological characteristics that a modern man possesses are the result of genotype inheritance with phenotypical variations. A given gene can exist in several different forms. Change of a gene from one form to another is called mutation. The type of mutation that occurs spontaneously in nature provides variation in genotypes and permits the evolution of new species. Mutation permits recombination of new genes with the genes already present. This new combination of genes structure is then put to test in the environment, which can select out those genotypes that turn out to be best fitted for the environment. Culturalbasis, Socio-Cultural Shaping of Behavior. After reading the biological basis of behavior, you may have developed an idea that many of our behaviors are influenced by hormones and many others occur as reflexive responses. However, hormones and reflexes do not explain all of our behavior. The hormones play an important role in regulating human physiology, but they do not completely control human behavior. Similarly, stereotype, fixed pattern, which is the most distinguishing feature of a reflex, does not appear with most human responses. We can draw examples from several domains of our life to argue that our behavior is more complex than the behavior of animals. A major reason for this complexity is that unlike animals, human beings have a culture to regulate their behavior. Let us consider the basic need of hunger. We know that it has a biological basis, which is common among animals and human beings, but the way this need is gratified by human beings is extremely complex. For example, some people eat vegetarian food, while others eat non-vegetarian food. How have they become vegetarians and non-vegetarians? Some vegetarians take eggs, others do not. Why is that so? Try to think how people have come to behave so differently in terms of food intake. If you explore further, you will also find variations in the manner in which food is eaten, e.g., directly with hand, or with the help of spoons, forks and knives. Sexual behavior can be taken as another example. We know that this behavior involves hormones and reflexive reactions in animals and human beings alike. While among animals sexual behavior is fairly simple and reflexive, all animals indulge in sexual behavior almost in the same manner. It is so complex among human beings that it can hardly be described as reflexive. Partner preferences are a key feature of human sexual behavior. The bases of these preferences widely differ within and across societies. Human sexual behavior is also governed by many rules, standards, values, and laws. However, these rules and standards also remain in a continuous process of change. These examples illustrate that biological factors alone cannot help us very much in understanding human behavior. The nature of human beings is very different from those provided to us by biological scientists. Human nature has evolved through an interplay of biological and cultural forces. These forces have made us similar in many ways and different in others. Concept of culture. You have read that human behavior can be understood only by viewing it in the socio-cultural context in which it occurs. Human behavior is fundamentally social. It involves relationships with other people, reactions to their behavior, and engagement with innumerable products made available to us by our predecessors. Although many other species are also social like us, human beings are cultural as well. You may ask, what does it mean to be cultural? In order to answer this question, we will need to understand the meaning of culture. In the simplest terms, culture refers to the man-made part of the environment. It comprises diverse products of the behavior of many people, including ourselves. These products can be material objects, e.g., tools, sculptures, ideas, e.g., categories, norms, or social institutions, e.g., family, school. We find them almost everywhere. They influence behavior, although we may not always be aware of it. Let us look at some examples. The room you might be in now is a cultural product. It is the result of someone's architectural ideas and building skills. Your room may be rectangular, but there are many places where rooms are not rectangular, e.g., those of Eskimos. While reading this chapter, you might be sitting on a chair that some people designed and built some time ago. Since sitting in a chair requires a particular posture, this invention is shaping your behavior. There are societies without chairs. Just try to think how people in those societies would be sitting in order to do some reading. Students sit on chairs in the classrooms, but chairs are not found in all schools. In schools in most villages there are no chairs for students. They sit on the ground, or on a piece of sack spread over it. That in some societies children gather in rooms facing a teacher is another kind of cultural product, called schooling. This institution may have material aspects, such as buildings, and ideational aspects, such as the notion that schooling should take place at a specific place and time, or the idea that individuals attending schools must be evaluated and given certificates on successful completion of schooling. This institution also provides with behavioral expectation for all those who participate in it. Both teachers and students have a series of roles to play and responsibilities to share. Individuals, families and communities have different views about schooling. Some believe that school education is a valuable thing. They have unshaken faith that school education can make people powerful and change their destiny. Others consider it neither valuable nor do they have faith in its strength as such. Some societies emphasize on equal education for boys and girls, others do not. Some groups widely participate in the process of schooling, others, e.g., some tribal groups participate little or not at all. People with special needs often remain deprived of school education for a number of reasons. People's views about communities, gender, caste groups and those with special needs and their educability also differ widely across societies. As you look around you will find that much of our life as human beings involves interacting with various cultural products, and behaving in accord with them. This means that culture shapes our behavior in a significant manner. However, it may also be noted at this point that just as culture shapes us, we also shape our culture. Several anthropologists have pointed out the mutual influences of culture and psyche on each other. They suggest that the relationship between individuals and their social surroundings is interactive, and in the course of these interactions, they constitute each other. This perspective emphasizes that human beings are not passive recipients of cultural forces. Instead, they themselves create the context in which their behavior is shaped. Activity 3.3. Talk to students belonging to different states regarding their food, festivals, dress, customs, etc. Prepare a list of the differences and similarities and discuss with your teacher. What is culture? In spite of the fact that culture is always with us, much confusion exists in defining culture. It is more like the notion of energy in physics or group in sociology. Some believe that culture really exists out there, and it matters to individuals, while others believe that culture does not really exist, instead it is an idea created and shared by a group of people. The innumerable definitions of culture commonly point to some of its essential features. One is that culture includes behavioral products of others who preceded us. It indicates both substantial and abstract particulars that have prior existence in one form or another. Thus, culture is already there as we begin life. It contains values that will be expressed and a language in which to express them. It contains a way of life that will be followed by most of us who grow up in that context. Such a conceptualization of culture tends to place it outside the individual, but there are also treatments of culture that places it in the minds of individuals. In the latter case, culture is identified with a historically transmitted pattern of meanings embodied in symbols. Culture provides meaning by creating significant categories like social practices, e.g., marriage, and roles, e.g., bridegroom, as well as values, beliefs and premises. As Richard Schwetter put it, to learn that a mother's sister's husband is an uncle, one must somehow receive the frame of understanding from others. Whether culture is taken as an existing reality, or as an abstraction, or both, it exerts many real influences on human behavior. It allows us to categorize and explain many important differences in human behavior that were previously attributed to biological differences. Social and cultural contexts within which human development takes place vary widely over time and place. For example, some 20 years ago children in India would not have known several products that are now part of a child's world. Similarly, an Adivasi living in a remote forest or hilly area would not have a pizza, or sandwich, as breakfast. In the previous paragraphs, we have made frequent use of the terms culture and society. Often they are considered to carry similar meaning. Let us note at this point that they are not the same thing. A society is a group of people who occupy a particular territory and speak a common language not generally understood by neighboring people. A society may or may not be a single nation, but every society has its own culture, and it is culture that shapes human behavior from society to society. Culture is the label for all the different features that vary from society to society. It is these different features of society whose influences psychologists want to examine in their studies of human behavior. Thus, a group of people, who manage their livelihood through hunting and gathering in forests, would present a life characterized by certain features that will not be found in a society that lives mainly on agricultural produce or wage earnings. Cultural transmission. We have seen earlier that as human beings we are both biological and socio-cultural creatures. As biological creatures, we have certain vital needs. Their fulfillment enhances our chances of surviving. In fulfilling these needs we use most of our acquired skills. We also have a highly developed capacity to benefit from experiences of our own and those of others. No other creature has learning capacity to the same extent as we have. No other creature has created an organized system of learning, called education, and none in this universe wants to learn as much as we do. As a result, we display many forms of behavior that are uniquely human, and creations of what we call culture. The processes of enculturation and socialization make us cultural beings. Enculturation. Enculturation refers to all learning that takes place without direct, deliberate teaching. We learn certain ideas, concepts, and values simply because of their availability in our cultural context. For example, what is vegetable, and what is weed, or what is cereal, and what is non-cereal, is defined by what is already there, previously labeled as vegetable, or cereal, and agreed upon by people at large. Such concepts are transmitted, both directly and indirectly, and are learned very well because they are an integral part of the life of a cultural group, and are never questioned. All such examples of learning are called enculturation. Thus, enculturation refers to all learning that occurs in human life because of its availability in our socio-cultural context. The key element of enculturation is learning by observation. Whenever we learn any content of our society by observation, enculturation is in evidence. These contents are culturally shaped by our preceding generations. In this sense, enculturation always refers to learning something that is already available. A major part of our behavior is the product of enculturation. In Indian families, many complex activities, like cooking, are learned by observation. There is no prescribed curriculum and no textbook for such activities, and there is also no deliberate instruction for cooking. Although the effects of enculturation are obvious, people are generally not aware of these effects. They are also generally not aware of what is not available in the society to be learned. This leads to an apparent paradox that people who are most thoroughly enculturated are often the least aware of their culture's role in modeling them. Socialization. Socialization is a process by which individuals acquire knowledge, skills and dispositions, which enable them to participate as effective members of groups and society. It is a process that continues over the entire lifespan, and through which one learns and develops ways of effective functioning at any stage of development. Socialization forms the basis of social and cultural transmission from one generation to the next. Its failure in any society may endanger the very existence of that society. The concept of socialization suggests that all human beings are capable of a far greater repertoire of behaviors than they ever exhibit. We begin life in a particular social context, and there we learn to make certain responses and not others. The most clear example is our linguistic behavior. Although we can speak any language that exists in this world, we learn to speak only that language which people around us speak. Within this social context we also learn many other things, e.g., when to express emotions and when to suppress them. The probability of our behaving in a particular way is greatly affected by people who relate to us. Anyone who possesses power relative to us can socialize us. Such people are called socialization agents. These agents include parents, teachers and other elders, who are more knowledgeable in the ways of their society. Under certain conditions, however, even our age peers can affect socialization. The process of socialization is not always a smooth transition between the individual and the socialization agent. It sometimes involves conflicts. In such situations not only are some responses punished, but some are also blocked by the behavior of others in effective ways. At the same time, several responses need to be rewarded so that they acquire greater strength. Thus, reward and punishment serve as basic means for achieving the goals of socialization. In this sense, all socialization seems to involve efforts by others to control behavior. Socialization, although primarily consists of deliberate teaching for producing acceptable behavior, the process is not unidirectional. Individuals are not only influenced by their social environment, but they also influence it. In societies that comprise many social groups, individuals may choose those to which they wish to belong. With increased migration, individuals are not only socialized once, but are often re-socialized differently in their lifespan. This process is known as acculturation, which we will discuss later in this chapter. Due to the processes of enculturation and socialization, we find behavioral similarities within societies and behavioral differences across societies. Both processes involve learning from other people. In the case of socialization, the learning involves deliberate teaching. In the case of enculturation, teaching is not necessary for learning to take place. Enculturation means engagement of people in their culture. Since most of the learning takes place with our engagement in our culture, socialization can be easily subsumed under the process of enculturation. A good deal of our learning involves both enculturation and socialization. Language learning is a good example. While a lot of language learning takes place spontaneously, there is also a certain amount of direct teaching of the language, such as in grammar courses in elementary schools. On the other hand, learning of language other than the mother tongue, such as learning of Hindi by a European child, or of French by a child in India, is completely a deliberate process. Socialization agents. A number of people who relate to us possess power to socialize us. Such people are called socialization agents. Parents and family members are the most significant socialization agents. Legal responsibility of child care, too, lies with parents. Their task is to nurture children in such a manner that their natural potentials are maximized and negative behavior tendencies are minimized or controlled. Since each child is also part of a larger community or society, several other influences, e.g., teachers, peer groups, also operate on his life. We will briefly discuss some of these influences. Parents. Parents have most direct and significant impact on children's development. Children respond in different ways to parents in different situations. Parents encourage certain behaviors by rewarding them verbally, e.g., praising, or in other tangible ways, e.g., buying chocolates or objects of child's desire. They also discourage certain behaviors through non-approving behaviors. They also arrange to put children in a variety of situations that provide them with a variety of positive experiences, learning opportunities, and challenges. While interacting with children, parents adopt different strategies, which are generally known as parenting styles. A distinction is made between authoritative, authoritarian, and democratic or permissive parenting styles. Studies indicate that parents vary enormously in the treatment of children in terms of their degree of acceptance and degree of control. The conditions of life in which parents live, poverty, illness, job stress, nature of family, also influence the styles they adopt in socializing children. Grandparental proximity and network of social relationships play considerable role in child socialization directly or through parental influences. School. School is another important socializing agent. Since children spend a long time in schools, which provide them with a fairly organized setup for interaction with teachers and peers, school is today being viewed as a more important agent of child socialization than parents and family. Children learn not only cognitive skills, e.g., reading, writing, doing mathematics, but also many social skills, e.g., ways of behaving with elders and age mates, accepting roles, fulfilling responsibilities. They also learn and internalize the norms and rules of society. Several other positive qualities, such as self-initiative, self-control, responsibility, and creativity are encouraged in schools. These qualities make children more self-reliant. If the transaction has been successful, the skills and knowledge children acquire in schools either through curriculum or interaction with teachers and peers also get transferred to other domains of their life. Many researchers believe that a good school can altogether transform a child's personality. That is why we find that even poor parents want to send their children to good schools. Peer groups. One of the chief characteristics of the middle childhood stage is the extension of social network beyond home. Friendship acquires great significance in this respect. It provides children not only with a good opportunity to be in company of others, but also for organizing various activities, e.g., play collectively with the members of their own age. Qualities like sharing, trust, mutual understanding, role acceptance, and fulfillment develop in interaction with peers. Children also learn to assert their own point of view and accept and adapt to those of others. Development of self-identity is greatly facilitated by the peer group. Since communication of children with peer group is direct, process of socialization is generally smooth. Media influence. In recent years, media has also acquired the property of a socialization agent. Through television, newspapers, books, and cinema, the external world is making its way into our home and our lives. While children learn about many things from these sources, adolescents and young adults often derive their models from them, particularly from television and cinema. The exposure to violence on television is a major issue of discussion, since studies indicate that observing violence on television enhances aggressive behavior among children. There is a need to use this agent of socialization in a better way in order to prevent children from developing undesirable behaviors. Activity 3.4. Observe 4 to 5 families belonging to different cultural and socio-economic background for about half an hour in the morning and evening, interacting with their children for 5 days. Do you find any difference in parental interaction with their sons and daughters? Note their distinct pattern of behavior and discuss this with your teacher. Acculturation. Acculturation refers to cultural and psychological changes resulting from contact with other cultures. Contact may be direct, e.g., when one moves and settles in a new culture, or indirect, e.g., through media or other means. It may be voluntary, e.g., when one goes abroad for higher studies, training, job, or trade, or involuntary, e.g., through colonial experience, invasion, political refuge. In both cases, people often need to learn, and also they do learn, something new to negotiate life with people of other cultural groups. For example, during the British rule in India, many individuals and groups adopted several aspects of British lifestyle. They preferred to go to the English schools, take up salaried jobs, dress in English clothes, speak English language, and change their religion. Acculturation can take place any time in one's life. Whenever it occurs, it requires relearning of norms, values, dispositions, and patterns of behavior. Changes in these aspects require re-socialization. Sometimes people find it easy to learn these new things, and if their learning has been successful, shifts in their behavior easily take place in the direction of the group that brings in acculturation. In this situation, transition to a new life is relatively smooth and free from problems. On the other hand, in many situations people experience difficulties in dealing with new demands of change. They find change difficult, and are thrown into a state of conflict. This situation is relatively painful as it leads to experience of stress and other behavioral difficulties by acculturating individuals and groups. Psychologists have widely studied how people psychologically change during acculturation. For any acculturation to take place, contact with another cultural group is essential. This often generates some sort of conflict. Since people cannot live in a state of conflict for a long time, they often resort to certain strategies to resolve their conflicts. For a long time it was felt that social or cultural change oriented towards modernity was unidirectional, which meant that all people confronting the problem of change would move from a traditional state to a state of modernity. However, studies carried out with immigrants to Western countries and native or tribal people in different parts of the world have revealed that people have various options to deal with the problem of acculturative changes. Thus, the course of acculturative change is multidirectional. Changes due to acculturation may be examined at subjective and objective levels. At the subjective level, changes are often reflected in people's attitudes towards change. They are referred to as acculturation attitudes. At the objective level, changes are reflected in people's day-to-day behaviors and activities. These are referred to as acculturation strategies. In order to understand acculturation, it is necessary to examine it at both levels. At the objective level of acculturation, one can look at a variety of changes that might be evident in people's life. Language, dressing style, means of livelihood, housing and household goods, ornaments, furniture, means of entertainment, use of technology, travel experience, and exposure to movies, etc. can provide clear indications of change that individuals and groups might have accepted in their life. Based on these indicators, we can easily identify the degree to which acculturative change has entered into an individual's or a group's life. The only problem is that these indicators do not always indicate conscious acceptance of change by individuals or groups. They are held by people because they are easily available and economically affordable. Thus, in some cases, these indicators appear somewhat deceptive. In order to place some confidence in conscious acceptance of change, we need to analyze them at the subjective level. John Barry is well known for his studies on psychological acculturation. He argues that there are two important issues that all acculturating individuals and groups face in culture contact situations. One relates to the degree to which there is a desire to maintain one's culture and identity. Another relates to the degree to which there is a desire to engage in daily interactions with members of other cultural groups. Based on people's positive or negative answer to these issues, the following 4 acculturative strategies have been derived. Integration. It refers to an attitude in which there is an interest in both maintaining one's original culture and identity, while staying in daily interaction with other cultural groups. In this case, there is some degree of cultural integrity maintained while interacting with other cultural groups. Assimilation. It refers to an attitude, which people do not wish to maintain their cultural identity, and they move to become an integral part of the other culture. In this case, there is loss of one's culture and identity. Separation, it refers to an attitude in which people seem to place a value on holding on to their original culture, and wish to avoid interaction with other cultural groups. In this case, people often tend to glorify their cultural identity. Marginalization, it refers to an attitude in which there is little possibility or interest in one's cultural maintenance, and little interest in having relations with other cultural groups. In this case, people generally remain undecided about what they should do, and continue to stay with a great deal of stress. You have read in this chapter that human behavior is not fully under the control of biological factors alone. Socio-cultural factors interact with biological dispositions of individuals to give a particular shape to their behavior in a given society. Since societies and cultures across the globe are not homogeneous, human behavior is also not expressed in the same way everywhere. This allows us to say that besides biological roots, there are cultural roots of human behavior. While genes write the script of biological transmissions, memes write the script of cultural transmissions. The genes and memes work together to allow behavior to unfold partly in some similar and partly